Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. We are 100% sponsor based, which means that all the revenues we derive come from sponsorships. But I try to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically trying to choose those who have values well aligned to the values expressed on this show, like freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do is a few ad reads right here at the top of the show and then a few ad reads in the middle. And I hope you won't skip them. I hope you'll take the time, listen, and see what they have to offer, because again, these are hand-selected sponsors. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Pacific Bitcoin Conference, brought to you by Swan. Now, this is going to be a 2-day event in Los Angeles, November 10th and 11th, 2022. And if you haven't been to a Bitcoin conference yet, I highly recommend it, as there really is no better way to get integrated into the Bitcoin community. Speakers announced so far include Michael Saylor, Lynn Alden, many others. I'll be speaking as well. Michael Saylor is even quoted as saying, "This is going to be the event of the year, so you definitely don't want to miss it." So go to pacificbitcoin.com and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get your tickets today. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Ledn. Ledn lets you do more with your digital assets. For instance, Ledn offers a B2X loan product that lets you leverage your existing Bitcoin to buy even more Bitcoin. Or you can also get traditional Bitcoin collateralized US dollar loans through Ledn as well. Ledn also offers both Bitcoin and USDC denominated savings accounts, letting you generate yield on your digital assets. Recently, Ledn has launched a Bitcoin mortgage product as well that lets you use Bitcoin to buy a home or finance one that you already own. So go to ledn.io, that's LEDN.io today to sign up.
Obi Nwosu, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Robert Breedlove. What's the history of Breedlove actually?
I've never had a guest open me up with a question like that right out of the gate. It's from a Scottish clan, and it translated from wolf hunter.
Wow.
Down to Breedlove. Yeah, so it doesn't at all, not at all what you would expect, but that's where it comes from.
No. Well, I was just in Edinburgh 2 days ago for UK Bitcoin conference, and it was. I used to live in Glasgow for 4 years, and I was made an honorary Scotsman at the time. So it just reminded me how much I really like the passion of Scottish people and Scottish culture. So great heritage.
Yes, great heritage. I just learned recently that it was a lot of the theologians, thinkers, and philosophers from Scotland that created the spirit of what would become the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution.
Oh, wow.
I don't know a lot about that, but looking forward to learning more. Just by way of quick introduction for my audience, you are the CEO and co-founder of Fedi, which is a new but very important Bitcoin company. You're also a board member at some other Bitcoin companies, which I'll leave it to you whether you want to describe those or not. And technically, you are a Nigerian prince. I just thought I had to throw that one in for my audience as well.
That's I don't really technically, but my father was a king of Yam. It's a type of title, and as such, being his son, I'm technically a prince, but it's not a significant title. I'm not hobnobbing with the British royalty or anything like
that. Well, I think it still sounds pretty important, so you can use it with a lot of gravitas over here. This conversation has been a long time coming, and I appreciate you coming on to do this. I guess you and I talked originally about this maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I suppose. We just had kind of a long informal discussion about what we would talk about if we did the show. And then we more recently had another one of those. And I think you have some very fascinating perspectives, both in that you work very closely to Bitcoin. You see how it's evolving on the ground, so to speak, working at the front lines of this network and its proliferation in the world. But then you also seem to have a lot of deep, more visionary type thoughts about where all this is going. And so, like I said, I'm really excited to have you on and talk about this. And I guess a place to start, not really sure exactly where we could start, but this idea you have about the dichotomy between regulated and real Bitcoin. And now, I guess this is more of a future oriented vision where you see things going, but if you would be so kind, could you please just unpack for us what these terms mean? And is this something that exists today in the world, or is this something that we're headed towards? How do you describe this regulated versus real Bitcoin?
Yeah, so 2013, I and my co-founders at the time launched CoinFloor, and it went on to become the UK's longest running Bitcoin exchange. But at that point, and I could talk about that more, I think we were, in the years preceding that and early 2013, we were in the Bitcoin was being effectively ignored by mainstream. It was still something only for geeks and a few libertarians. And as such, the people around then had much more time to think about why they were devoting their time to this thing, what it meant. There were less distractions with alternative coins, less distractions by mainstream. And you saw that you had the Nakamoto Institute would come out with these well thought out, long form articles. And it was just a great time for people who want to think deeply about what were the potential impacts of Bitcoin. And CoinFloor was no exception. We were working on building this product. And at that time was just getting people to notice this Bitcoin thing beyond the distractions. Where we would have lots of very deep conversations, my co-founders and a lot of the senior engineers. If you're an engineer working in this, you'll still tend to be quite philosophical. One of the engineers and I would have conversations about where it would all end up. And at one point he put an article on Reddit, which as running this startup, so on, I didn't really want to put my name to it, but definitely we were on exactly the same page with the vision. And it became very clear that we were going to see a fork is the wrong word, but definitely a split in Bitcoin. The reason why a fork is the wrong word is because a fork of a blockchain has a certain technical description, and the end result is two completely separate parallel blockchains. Effectively, at some point, they are incompatible with each other. We saw that happen with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. A couple of years later, you had the wars, and other altcoins have experienced a similar thing. But what became clear here, and this was, by the way, prior to the proliferation of blockchain monitoring companies and so on, but it became clear that there is going to be a tension as people, as countries, as regulators eventually started to understand the potential of Bitcoin. It became clear in 2013, 2014 that there would be increasing demand to regulate Bitcoin. But the true nature and power of Bitcoin is to be something that is freedom finance. It's meritocratic money that anyone can use. And ultimate utility comes from its network effect. And ultimate network effect comes from having the least restrictions on who you can interact with. any restriction will reduce this network effect. And so this desire for ultimate utility and this desire for increased control over this new asset will lead to two types of Bitcoin coexisting on the same blockchain, not a fork where they no longer coexist, but on the same blockchain. And so there needs to be a classification of those two types. One would be, for want of a better word, sometimes in that original Reddit post, they were called Black Bitcoin. But another way of describing them would be real Bitcoin. And those would be the ones that are out with the regulated system. They are free, that you can send them from anyone to anyone. But they'll be increasingly have difficulties being able to interact with the regulated system. And then there will be these other approved, or in the original article, they were called white Bitcoin. And another way I like to think about them visually is regulated Bitcoin. And these ones would be approved and therefore allowed within the regulated system, and they would circulate around the regulated system. And over time, the ability to go from real Bitcoin to regulated Bitcoin and back again become more and more difficult until we get to a point where we will ultimately see real Bitcoin not able to interact with the regulated Bitcoin ecosystem through regulated channels. The regulated drawbridge will be raised. And so the only ways in which you'll be able to interact will be other mechanisms. However, because of the desire and value of being able to interact, even if there are no regulated paths, for good or for ill, there will be other ways of interacting. So there will be some way of being able to provide price discovery. However, that's where the debate continued. Which one over time would be more valuable? No matter how we looked at it, even though it may initially be that the regulated ones would from a common sense point of view, have more value than the ones outside the system. From our point of view, it seemed clearer that over time, the real Bitcoins would gain more value over the regulated ones. So much so that it became very important for people to understand that ultimately they should maintain a balance of real Bitcoins because they will be worth far more than regulated Bitcoins over time. And there are many reasons why that's the case.
That's really, really interesting stuff there. That this tension you've identified between Bitcoin that would be surveyed and controlled to some extent, existing in walled gardens, I guess might be a useful analogy here, versus the Bitcoin that is just wild and free, right? That does seem to be somewhat of an obvious direction it's going, but it's more interesting that you've actually decomposed this into the consequences. And the restrictions are interesting too, because I'm thinking, money is valued based on its liquidity and network effects, which are almost kind of one and the same when it comes to money. And then any restriction you place on those network effects it inhibits the value imputed to the money, right? So, in the modern fiat world, it makes you wonder how much money is just really being compromised in that respect, that it's not even really private property at this point, because you can't, you go to send a wire and they ask you questions. Obviously the currency is always being inflated. It's subject to capital controls and other regulations that just make it significantly restricted, let's say. And
well, the challenge you have as well is if you have a system which is completely walled, and then there is no way to externally and personally verify whether it's being debased, and there's no way to move balances off that platform. And at that stage, especially with the incentives of governments and so on, you will expect that they will start to employ the same processes around its control and management as they would do for fiat, i.e., they would tend to start to debase. You'll start seeing fractional reserve Bitcoining naturally occur. Whereas the Bitcoin that's outside of and out with the system, that is not possible to occur. So one will be inflated over time and the other one won't. So although there is a drive towards increasing regulation in the Bitcoin ecosystem as a mechanism to gain legitimacy, the question you have to ask yourself is who are you aiming to gain legitimacy from, and are they people that you should care about their thoughts around your Bitcoin? And if not, and I think the answer is not, then we should just focus on providing an alternative system that can provide you the user experience of this sort of regulated world without having to kowtow to the regulated world.
Yeah, I think because if you just engage in like first order thinking on this topic, you would tend to believe that the regulated Bitcoin would obviously trade at a premium and be more valuable, right? It's approved, it's white market, it's compliant, all these things that we take to be a sign of credibility in the modern world. Bitcoin sort of makes you question what those things even mean in this Bitcoinized future. And I do agree that in the distant long run, the opposite would be true, that you'd actually have the Bitcoin with less restrictions, the real Bitcoin would enjoy more network effects and then therefore be more valuable overall. And that it just gives you more options, right? If there's a Bitcoin that trades among all these jurisdictions and outside of them, it seems to me clear to me that would be more valuable than the Bitcoin that only trades within one of those walled gardens. It's just the size and liquidity of the network. And so, and I guess this is something I visit a lot here, because people will say, oh, well, obviously if you're not a criminal, you'll just live within the white market and be happy, right? Own nothing and be happy, whatever. But that's a problem, because you might not even be able to own the real physical Bitcoin inside that walled garden. You might be just owning some derivative from a bank or tax or currency authority, something like that. And if that is the case, or anything like that is the case, they're going to be applying more and more restrictions to that over time, right? More and more control over that regulated Bitcoin. And so I think that is what creates demand for unrestricted and unrestrictable money over time. It's like life is sort of oriented towards being more free, right? It always, given the option, it'll choose the thing that gives itself more options. And so that's kind of what we're talking about here, is the money that really affords its users the most options will tend to be the most successful over time.
Yeah, and I think there's a sort of a development in thinking around optionality and trust and verification. So if we look at the existing financial system, it's very much that don't verify, completely trust. And the challenge with that is it's rife with people being able to take advantage of that trust because no one wishes to verify. Now with Bitcoin, we have this base layer, which is obviously communicates and is a example of the philosophy of don't trust, verify, and that's a base layer that's incredibly powerful. Now that we have gone, well over a decade now, I think we have a level of maturity of a industry to understand that there is value to be able to form trust groups. If you can form trust groups, you can. Any human endeavor that's above a certain level of complexity needs organizations, and there needs to be some level of trust. So trust is very, very powerful to be able to achieve big tasks. However, when you combine it with the discipline of also always verifying as well, to the extent that you can, that's when something special happens. So trust allows you to achieve big tasks. Verification allows you to protect yourself from people who will take advantage of that trust. It makes you bulletproof from bad actors. And that combination is, I think, the final state that you want to enter towards. And you can have that verification as part of the basic tenets of anybody within the system by having the money have that as its basic tenets. And then the philosophy around that money continually advise people and educate people to find any means possible to verify on an ongoing basis all the different parties that they are trusting. So that comes from a philosophy, and the philosophy around Bitcoin has that. Everything else we've seen, the existing fiat system, by decree, by trust, is clearly not in that realm. And this other wave of altcoins that tend to all be, any significant one, is proof of stake, which is, again, it eventually becomes a trust-based system, will have flawed and weak philosophical foundations, and as a result, you end up with a flawed and weak end state.
Yeah, it's an excellent point there that, trust is like a necessary ingredient for social coordination. Right? We can't verify everything everyone does all the time. That would just be too expensive and sort of defeat the purpose of social coordination in the first place, which is the economic division of labor. But at the same time, that trust opens up the system to being gamed, right? If you just trust someone blindly without any option of verification or option, I guess, would do, then you run the risk of making the system unstable, right? People just violate the trust effectively. So you need verification as a necessary counter force to that trust to expose violations of that trust. And it's that balance that makes a system coherent and stable. And yeah, that's why fiat doesn't work, right? Just trust, never verify. And then what does that typically end up in is a hyperinflation where it's all the trust has been abused to the point of decimating the currency system. And
that's the challenge is trust is natural from, the point that you're born, babies have to trust their parents implicitly. We have a natural inclination to trust. Verification, to verify, is not as natural because of the fact that, say, most people are taught to just trust their parents, trust their teachers, and so on and so forth. So if you want to build a very strong, resilient society, you need to have some mechanism to remind people to verify all the time and constantly think about how they can verify, because the trust bit naturally happens. You don't need to do much to make sure that happens. Now, having, again, during many of these sort of early days when we were trying to get people to understand the importance of Bitcoin, we spent a lot of time thinking about how you could build up this sort of culture around verification that was as strong as the natural culture around trust, to compensate for the risks of a society that's reliant purely on blind trust. And the end result is simple. The base primitives that you build your culture on and then everybody interacts with, one of them being the storage and transfer of value, should have that built into it, because then the philosophy of the society that's built on a foundation of don't trust, verify will build up a healthy a healthy attitude towards verification, not just when it comes to their money, but when it comes to the schooling, when it comes to medicine, when it comes to everything else. It's like this sort of thought virus, or meme, I think now we call it, but it's this incredible, powerful tool that you can apply to everything else you do. The importance is to understand that we should use that tool. It's a superpower, the desire and the reminder to constantly verify what we do, but we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The ability to form trusted groups is incredibly powerful as well. We just need a healthy dose of verification to make it reach its final form.
Absolutely. I think here of like convertibility to gold with a bank, it's like, it's fine to put your savings in a bank and trust the bank to not run a fractional reserve or abscond with your money, but you have to maintain that option to convert into real money, right? And exit to another bank. And it's that the existence of that option is what keeps the bank honest. Like, they know they can lose your business at any time. So the word trust here, it's a little bit muddied perhaps, because what we're really talking about is a reduction of interpersonal trust and an increase in, I don't know what you call the other one, maybe a phenomenological trust. We're basically saying a money based less on trusting people, more on trusting math, something like that. That would be much more useful than this don't verify trust model, which gets us into lots of trouble. So you have this pinned tweet. That's really interesting. You basically, and I'll let you tell the story here, but you made a rough prediction of where you think Bitcoin is going in the years ahead. And you're quoting Gandhi here. So if you'd be so kind, could you just unpack that story a little bit for us? Like, what inspired the tweet? And then last time we talked, you kind of broke it down into how you saw these phases unfolding. Could you just explain that a little bit to us?
Yeah, no problem. The tweet, actually, I found out, I'm not sure who the original reference is for the tweet, but my understanding is actually Gandhi wasn't the person who originally created this tweet, but most people attribute it to Gandhi. But that's just an interesting aside. But he originally had this statement about how change occurs when you have right on your side, and you have a movement for change. And the statement is, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And as you see these stages happen, you should use these to give you confidence that you're going the right way. If they just ignore you and they never pay attention to you after several years, then you're probably not doing something significant. If they laugh at you, it could be then there's a risk that you're just doing something ridiculous, or it's just the first sign that you are onto something. You know that you're onto something when they start to fight you. Because if they've gone through those intervening steps, you are doing something very powerful. They now recognize that it's more than just a joke, and they begin to fight. And as long as you maintain the courage of your convictions, and the fundamental idea retains its quality and its ability to change the world, then you will eventually win. So that was the basic idea. Now, having run CoinFloor over the years, when we started, everybody was ignoring us. We tried very hard to get people to care about Bitcoin. And I remember going to events, talking about Bitcoin. No one wanted to know. And then something happened. We went through the first, well, it wasn't the first, but a significant bear market. after Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox is an exchange that was at the time one of the largest exchanges in the world, and it famously imploded in 2012, 2013 range. And at that point, we transitioned. People then took notice because they started to talk about large amounts of money. But they just thought that this was a technology that was bound to fail. And people working in that industry were often laughed at by members of the traditional industry, the traditional financial sector. And that proceeded for a number of years until we went through another rally in price. Bitcoin went up to around nearly $20,000, similar price to it is today, actually. And then we hit another bear market. The price of Bitcoin dropped. And at that point, people still initially laughed at it. And then it sort of stuck at the low thousands, 3, 4, 5,000, and it sort of stayed flat. But what was also happening was that in the Bitcoin industry, excitement for Bitcoin Resolve was stronger than ever. People were working on incredibly interesting projects. We could see grassroots take-up of Bitcoin was still proceeding. And then we saw another switch in people's behavior. And when I say people's, the traditional financial sector and the regulatory space. At that point, they started the process of wanting to understand Bitcoin, to set up crypto asset task force and the like. Now, this was the beginning of a very significant phase. And this was around 2018. And about a year later, one of the first results of that, products of that, was on an international basis, was the determination by the Financial Action Task Force, also known as FATF, to approve a recommendation for cryptocurrencies, obviously including Bitcoin. And then it had a number of different bits in it, but the most controversial and the most famous is the travel rule. And what the travel rule determined was that just like traditional fiat banking and the traditional finance space, Bitcoin transactions and other cryptocurrencies would need to provide identifying information if it's going from between one regulated service provider, financial service provider, to another. Now, ostensibly, this seems to only be something that relates to regulated institutions, but in order to determine whether you're receiving money from a regulated entity or not, or you're sending money to a regulated entity or not, you would have to still provide this information, like KYC, know your customer, or receive that from anyone depositing to you or anyone you're sending to, because there's no way you'll know that they weren't regulated until you know who they are. So even though the wording focuses on the regulated space, the only way of implementing it would require you to provide this requirement to effectively docs, deposits and withdrawals for anyone interacting with the regulated space, whether they're an individual or not, at least for the first time, to understand who they are. Now, it was at that point, we were at 2019, and for the following year, you could see more of this happening around the world, where it dawned on me that we were seeing a process similar to what Gandhi had talked about many decades earlier. When I mapped it from 2008, when Bitcoin was first written about in the white paper, until 2013. For about 5 years, it was really clear during that period, up until around the time we launched CoinFloor, Bitcoin was ignored. No one really cared about it in mainstream. Then from 2013, for the next 5 years to 2018, up until the second crash, Bitcoin was laughed at, it was ridiculed. And this was the period where I would go to events held in the City of London by members of the traditional space, these Chatham House Rules events, describe what we're doing in Bitcoin, and literally around these tables we were laughed at. It was so this is not a metaphor, this is the reality. It was considered a joke. Friends of mine who worked in the City of London would again constantly laugh at what we were doing. We would explain how this was an incredibly powerful and transformative technology, but it didn't really hold water with most people. And then again, Bitcoin went from 19,000 and it dropped to by 70% or more. And the crescendo of laughing continued. And then as we got towards 2018 and it wasn't continuing to go to zero, the laughing died down. And it's around 2018, you started seeing these crypto asset task force. And what I realized when, again, having run a regulated exchange and being one of the people who'd worked very hard to help get Bitcoin exchanges to help them become regulated, because I had the naive view, the first order thinking view that this would be ultimately beneficial for Bitcoin. And maybe it was beneficial during that phase. I started to realize that Bitcoin was being attacked. The challenge here is that Bitcoin is a philosophy, Bitcoin is a technology, Bitcoin is code, it's speech. It's non-physical. And as such, you cannot attack a non-physical idea with guns or nuclear bombs. It just doesn't work. So how do you wage war against an idea? And what should you look for? What signs should you look for that it's happening? And when I thought about it, there's only two ways you can wage war against an idea: through misinformation and regulation. And now regulation is on a spectrum. You can have very light touch regulation all the way through to extreme regulation, also known as banning. But it just exists on a spectrum, but any restrictions is some form of regulation. And those are the only two things you could do. And when I realized that in 2020, I looked back over the last 2 years and realized that we were seeing an ever increasing rise in misinformation about Bitcoin. And we were seeing the first fruits of increasing regulation. So my realization was that we were in the period where we were being attacked. And given the time it had taken for the other two periods to last, I was pretty confident that we would hit a crescendo within the following 3 years. So it would be another 5-year period. The other reason why I had that view was that the FATF's advice, because they're an unelected body and they only provide advice, it just so happens that the implications of not taking their advice are profound for a country, because they could be put on the FATF sanctions lists, which means that almost every other country's financial institutions would not interact with you, effectively separating you from the rest of the financial ecosystem, which would be devastating. So it's advice, but it's advice that almost every country always takes. But because it's delivered on a country level, when you look back at previous advice, it normally takes 3 to 6 years to roll out that advice across countries. So in 2019, the clock started ticking, with a view that by 2022, most of the world would have implemented them. You get the stragglers over the following 3 years, but the biggest, most powerful countries implement it within 3 or 4 years. So that also correlated to the peak of the attack being 2022, 2023. However, at that point, we have two possible futures happening. Either that regulation succeeds, and in which case Bitcoin no longer is real. Bitcoin will cease to exist, and we'll only have regulated Bitcoin. And if we only have regulated Bitcoin, we do not have Bitcoin. Or Bitcoin succeeds. Now, when I looked at the ecosystem of Bitcoin, and I looked at the technologies that were gaining adoption, obviously Bitcoin itself and Lightning were foremost amongst them. I had very strong confidence that when we get to this point, this final battle, Bitcoin will succeed, and it succeeds by surviving. As long as there is one node somewhere running, then Bitcoin succeeds. And when you realize that it's almost impossible task for a regulator to completely ban Bitcoin. So Bitcoin will therefore win. And just like we saw in 2018, after Bitcoin fell, once Bitcoin continues to survive, the realization amongst the general population is that this is there for good. So the prediction was that 2023 will be the final battle, and Bitcoin will succeed. Now, I'm actually looking to revisit that prediction near the end of this year. And to cut a long story short, my conclusion is that I'm more confident than ever that 2023 will be the year that Bitcoin succeeds. A big part of that is because if there was one area that concerned me, that area would have been custody and privacy preserving custody. Having run an exchange and they sold it at the end of last year, we had tried very hard, and this was actually uncommon amongst exchanges, to get people to self-custody. In some cases, we literally begged people to self-custody, because although we are trusted and reliable, we understood that it's important for people to own real Bitcoin. And it became very clear over the years that the vast majority of people, at least in the next 10 to 15 years, would not be comfortable with self-custody, even though it's the gold standard or the Bitcoin standard. And there were three reasons why. Reason number one was that for many people globally, it's just too expensive at this point in time. They need to earn more money, gain more wealth for them to be able to afford it. Reason number two was, at this point in time, was too technically complex. Again, there are a lot of very great minds working on making it simpler, but we're still far away from it to being technically comfortable for most people. And the third reason is that through years of learned behavior, most people are uncomfortable self-custodying and taking responsibility to custody on their behalf. Now, I had a user of CoinFloor who's a really streetwise woman, of a few years older than myself, a bit more advanced years, but really streetwise and completely understood what Bitcoin was about. And one day, talking to her, asking and suggesting and offering help for her to self-custody, she told me something. She said, look, Obi, I completely get Bitcoin. I completely understand it. But the thing is this, I trust you more than I trust myself. And that was really profound for me, because it made me realize that we have to overcome decades worth of neuro-linguistic programming around people's ability to take responsibility for their money. And that's going to take decades to resolve, and a lot of education. And I realized that we didn't have decades. We needed a way of getting people off exchanges, because of that, with the best will in the world, we were going to get to 5%, maybe 10% of the people on the planet being able to self-custody, but that would leave 90% trapped in this regulated coin world, which means after rules like the travel rule coming into fruition around the world, which would mean that they would be lost for Bitcoin. So it was with that understanding that I sought and I looked for ways of getting people off exchanges. And it was in 2021 at Hackers Congress that I met my co-founder, Eric Syrian, one of my two co-founders. And he told me about a project he was working on called Fedimint. Now, in his mind, it was this incredible privacy preserving technology, which it was, but it was much more than that. When I looked at it, having my background as running exchange and looking for a way to get people off exchanges, I realized it represented just that. It wasn't the Bitcoin standard of self-custody, but it was a way of getting people off regulated exchanges, which was an important, huge first step. And when you combine that with a remit and an objective of constant lifelong learning, where we weave into the application ongoing financial education, and also providing them mechanisms to retain wealth, so people over time gain disposable income and wealth, you could see a path to getting more and more people self-custodying as well. But the first thing you have to do is, when the drawbridge gets drawn up, there needs to be an option for people to go to en masse at scale. And I believe that drawbridge is happening in 2023. And now with the existence of Fedimint, in combination with Lightning and Bitcoin, obviously as a base trust minimized layer, we have even more of a guarantee that we will win in 2023.
It's really interesting.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to legacy health insurance. Now let's face it, legacy health insurance is an absolute scam. Nobody can explain this better than the legendary comedian Chris Rock.
Insurance. You got to have some insurance. You got to. There's an insurance. They shouldn't even call it insurance. They should just call it in case shit. Like, I give a company some money in case shit happens. Now, if shit don't happen, shouldn't I get my money back?
So with CrowdHealth, instead of just paying premiums that you'll never see again, you can hold part of this pool of savings in dollars and in Bitcoin through CrowdHealth. And when you have a health event, you can draw against this pool of communal savings. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove to learn more or sign up. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Wasabi Wallet. Wasabi lets you use Bitcoin privately while still maintaining full control over your money. Specifically, Wasabi Wallet is an open source, non-custodial wallet with privacy built in by default. By using Wasabi, you're effectively putting the private back in private property. Wasabi Wallet is an easy-to-use privacy wallet that can support any amount of Bitcoin transactions. So go to wasabiwallet.io today to download this state-of-the-art wallet software. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Swan Private. Swan Private is a concierge financial services firm based in Los Angeles. Now, I've known the Swan team for years, and these guys are laser focused on the Bitcoin mission. They even have a zero tolerance policy for all shitcoining. Recently, their CEO, Corey Clipston, was instrumental in calling out many of these crypto scams right before they collapsed, saving a lot of people a lot of money in the process. Swan Private focuses on guiding high net worth individuals and businesses on all aspects of Bitcoin strategy, including buying, custodying, and market research. This concierge service provides you direct access to a private advisor by text, phone, or email. So go to swanprivate.com/breedlove today to sign up. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Masterworks. Masterworks gives you access to the fine art market at more affordable price points. They do this by offering you fractional shares in their $500 million portfolio of fine art. Now, fine art is an alternative asset class, and historically, it's been a great performer and a really good hedge against inflation. Most investors typically hold anywhere from 2 to 10% of their assets in an asset like fine art. To sign up or learn more, go to masterworks.com and use promo code BREEDLOVE. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Casa. Casa makes it simple to buy and secure your Bitcoin without wondering whether you're doing it right. Specifically, Casa provides a multi-key custody solution, which is by far the most secure way to custody your Bitcoin. Now, when I talk about Bitcoin being theft-proof money or inviolable private property, a multi-key custody model is exactly what I am talking about. Using multiple keys lets you maintain full control of your Bitcoin while also giving you redundancy in case you lose one of the keys. It's also the best way to secure your Bitcoin for inheritance planning purposes. So go to keys.casa, that's C-A-S-A, today to sign up and use discount code BREEDLOVE.
Just to read the tweet, which I don't know if we did or not, but you wrote that 2008 to 2013, Bitcoin is ignored. 2013 to 2018, Bitcoin is ridiculed. 2018 to 2023, Bitcoin is attacked. And from 2023 onward, Bitcoin wins.
Exactly.
And you posted that December 2020. So I think it's really interesting. And I'm curious, you said Bitcoin succeeds by surviving, which is, there's a lot packed into that, right? That is all really Bitcoin does, is it's optimized to survive no matter what comes at it, no matter what attacks are thrown at it, subversion strategies, anything. It's just really designed to survive and hold supply cap. I guess those are the kind of the two things it really does. And you said, so Bitcoin being attacked between 2018 and 2023, these attacks have not become overt yet, though. I mean, I guess there's some subversive discussion about how Bitcoin is not environmentally friendly, does not comply with ESG standards and whatnot. Do you anticipate a more overt attack on Bitcoin between now and the end of 2023?
I do, and I think we're starting to see that. I monitor various different things, and especially the edicts of global unelected advisory bodies. So you have FATF, you have the World Economic Forum, you have IMF, you have the World Bank, you have the Bank of International Settlements, and you have the Financial Stability Board. Now, all of these focus on different aspects of finance, global finance, and financial stability, and maintaining orderly markets, maintaining the effectiveness of central banks, countering terrorist financing and money laundering and other financial crimes, and dealing with the payment of loans and repayment of loans from various countries at some of the more disadvantaged countries in the world. But taking it together, these are different systems to provide a way of maintaining order, however you define order, within global financial markets and in global economies. And they have all, in the last 12 months, come out with advice, their views, opinions on cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And if you look at those, and sometimes they've come up with updated views, they've only got stronger and stronger and stronger, and they've only got more and more explicit. It's one of their their biggest hot buttons is stablecoins. That's by far the thing that they are most concerned about. And in a way, that's one thing I like about stablecoins, because they provide covering fire for the real important financial innovation, which is Bitcoin. Then they also have interest in the latest and greatest altcoin savior as well, whether it be ICOs, or then they move on to NFTs or DeFi or whatever. Again, I would argue, controversial, that I see a utility to these. But the biggest utility is that they provide covering fire for Bitcoin to continue to operate. But that is actually a useful thing that they do. And that is useful until we have the elements in place to make sure, I believe we're already past that point, the elements in place to make sure that we have all the tools to en masse get people at rapid scale, get people out of the regulated system, the regulated coin system, into the real coin world, where they have the most value, the most ability to interact. They are based on this anti-fragile money, and therefore we have the ability to create, from an engineer's perspective, is the ideal world, which is one that's built on meritocracy. So, i.e., if you're the quality of your argumentation and how hard you work should be the determinant of success as much as possible. Now, there's always going to be some inefficiencies where familial relationships and so on, and nepotism can lead to short-term benefits, but we don't want it to be entrenched. We want ultimately good quality argument, good quality thinking, and hard work to be the determinant, the measuring stick of success in the world, wherever you are. And while we don't have that, right now there's probably 50 Einsteins out there and 100 Elon Musks, but they just haven't been discovered because the way the world works right now makes it hard for them to be discovered. And not only do they lose out because of that, but everybody in the world loses out. Imagine we had 50 more Einsteins and 100 more Elon Musks working today, because they are there somewhere. We would all be, living on Mars, using our anti-gravity pods to, and we would have solved so many problems. So we all lose out from that. And that is the potential for a world which is built on a meritocratic money. So it's now, with the fundamental building blocks being in place, Bitcoin has been going on for more than a decade, and it's shown itself to be incredibly stable. Without this huge ICO-fueled marketing machine, it continues to maintain and increase its dominance. It continues to become more and more censorship resistant. Even if you take China, one of the most authoritarian regimes, and clearly an authoritarian regime, where they issued an edict completely banning Bitcoin mining. A year or so later, we're back at 20% of the entire global Bitcoin mining is happening from China. And that's where it's so if one of the most authoritarian regimes in the world is not able to control Bitcoin mining, then democracies are not going to be able to control Bitcoin mining, even if they chose to ban it. So we know that's to be the case. We know Bitcoin is, again, continue to operate in a really incredibly strong manner. And we have a healthy ecosystem of people working on the open source technology. We have organizations like, I'm a board member for B-Trust, and we are locating, educating, and remunerating Bitcoin open source protocol engineers, but not just from the West, but from the rest. So starting in Africa, but expanding across the South, the rest of the global South, to add to the diversity and add to the resilience of the people who can work full-time on Bitcoin. So again, Bitcoin is really strong. Lightning continues to advance, continues to show this hockey stick-like growth and adoption. And again, there are more resources that are coming to play in supporting people working on that. And the final challenge around custody, I believe there are a number of people working on this. So we're not the only one. There are other people working on making Bitcoin custody privacy preserving and something that's viable, easy enough and viable for people to come off exchanges and use. But I focus on Fedi, and I know that Fedi and Fedimint by itself is good enough. So now that I know it's already good enough to get billions of people off, then the custody problem has been solved. We may be one of many people to solve it, but we only need one to solve it. And we already have that one. So the ecosystem is ready for 2023. And so I'm really excited because we'll come to the battle with weapons that the opposition cannot imagine. And our objective is just to survive. Their objective is to destroy every single last one. And that is an impossibility.
Right. Yeah. Bitcoin certainly has the ultimate, or offers users, I guess, the ultimate defender's advantage. Yeah. That you can just occupy this nearly unassailable place if you're in the proper custody schema, and if you've taken measures in regard to privacy, then you're hard to identify even at that point as a target. I like this. You've been dropping some good bombs today. Bitcoin is meritocratic money. That's a really good one too. Nice and simple. And I guess it would imply then that fiat currency is the opposite of that. I don't know what that is. Maybe autocratic money or corrupt money, something like that. It's not succeeding based on its own merits. It's succeeding in the marketplace at the point of a gun, right? You basically have to use this or else, pay your taxes in this or else, etc. And that I'm reminded of another Gandhi quote from that. And he said that civil disobedience becomes a sacred duty when the state has become lawless or corrupt. So I guess we're engaging in some kind of Gandhian civil disobedience just by working with Bitcoin or holding Bitcoin, saving in Bitcoin. My question to you is, if Bitcoin is being attacked today, the fight is underway, let's say, roughly 2018 through present, you think through the end of 2023, maybe longer if you revise your prediction, as you said. But does that mean we are moving toward this regulated versus real Bitcoin split? Does that come as a result of these attacks? Like, how does the attack on Bitcoin, I guess, translate into this split that we explored at the top of the show between regulated and real Bitcoin?
I think, well, you've hit the nail on the head. It's one of these, if you can't beat them, join them, but instead they want to subsume Bitcoin. So the idea would be to regulate it, make it appear like it's something that they've now worked with, but ultimately transform it into being the same as the existing system. But just maybe it becomes a rebrand, but it's same dog, new tricks, as it were. So the way you will see it is this adoption of regulation, the existing financial institution, the major banks who have historically been incredibly anti-Bitcoin, laughed at it, said it was going to not succeed, have offboarded more Bitcoin exchanges and companies than you could keep track of, potentially both openly and behind the scenes, and made it very difficult for Bitcoin companies to succeed. And having run a Bitcoin exchange in the past, I know I've been through that pain. And if you're running a Bitcoin exchange right now or a cryptocurrency exchange right now, you will be going through that pain as well. And it will be 10 times more difficult than it was 2 years ago. But you will be precluded from stating that, because if you say anything like that, the way regulation works is it's similar in most reasonable jurisdictions, but in the UK, you have this concept of being fit and proper. Fit, and that's for anyone who's running a financial institution or anyone who's working in the compliance department. So the entire compliance department and the breadth of the organization at the senior levels, they have to be fit and proper. Fitness requires them to completely understand the technicalities of the law, of regulation. And that seems reasonable. You should understand you should be skilled in your craft. But proprietary is a very interesting one because it's subjective. You need to behave in this proper manner, but proper is at the definition of the regulator, and they never make it fully clear what that definition is. They give you these broad things that you should behave in a proper manner and so on, but they leave it for you to decide what that is. So for example, you have to take a risk-based approach when onboarding users. But again, you have to decide what the risk is, and you have to decide how you define a risk-based approach. They can give you these high-level terms, like you don't want to take unnecessary risks, and if you are taking a high risk, then you have to have appropriate level of process to take that risk into account. But both of these seemingly innocuous rules lead to this culture of fear, because the punishment of getting it wrong is your business that you may have worked many, sweated blood, sweat and tears on, and employs many people, may be shut down with one mistake as deemed by the regulators. And you never fully know whether you're going too far. So this is a very powerful tool to control a regulated industry. And that tool only works if you're in the regulated space. So without having to do much work, I get this asynchronous level of control. And this is why you're going to see this switch. And this is why there's a desire to move people into the regulated world with these sort of enticements of ease of banking, all this pain you've been going through for the last 10 years. Don't you want it to go away? Just agree to be as part of this regulated system, and it'll be easy. You'll get banking whenever you want. You'll be able to use all the services and features that you want to, but you are now trapped within the system. And the punishment of ever making a mistake going forward and letting the wrong person have an account, however you define wrong, we can't be very clear as to what is wrong. You have to define that. But if you get it wrong, you will never, and the punishment can be as strong as never being able to take on any regulated person role in the industry for the rest of your career. So it's not just 1 year, 2 years, you could be out for the rest of your career. It's incredibly harsh punishment. And so I've been on many panels with people who are within the industry, and they are using this diplomatic language saying that they agree with the principles of Bitcoin, but it's important to put in reasonable regulation. You go off the stage and I'm telling you, I completely 100% agree with you. But if I said that publicly, I risk huge repercussions for myself, the rest of my career, my company, and so on and so forth. So it's this horrible, insidious environment. And the moment I was able to sell CoinFloor and focus on my new mission, which I'm going to focus on the rest of my life, which I always state is all Bitcoin, all empowering the global South, all with global impact all the time, was one of the most uplifting days of my life. Well, I spent probably a week just sleeping because recovering from 8 years of running a regulated platform. And then every day since then has just been better than the last, because you're free, and you cannot put a price on this. And the freedom is a mental, philosophical freedom. The only people I am now jealous of I've met, like in Hackers Congress, in parts of Latin America and Africa, where peer-to-peer trading is far more common. I've met people who've been in the Bitcoin space for 1 or 2 years, some of them 6, 7, 8 years or longer. And there's a surprising number of people in these parts of the world I focus on who have bought Bitcoin, have held Bitcoin, have used Bitcoin for spending, maybe even traded. Whatever they wish to do, they're free to do what they want. And they have never interacted with a regulated party from the beginning. Every Bitcoin they bought was bought free. All custody has been free from beginning. And Now that they see all this regulation coming in for people who have bought on exchange and then withdrawn and so on, and there's still questions years later, etc. Their level of freedom and their sense of freedom is something because I ran a regulated exchange, so I bought on a regulated exchange. I will never be able to have that, at least for the portion of my wealth that's touched the regulated world. But when you look in the eyes of people who've never had to touch the regulated world, and they've now, maybe it was difficult to begin with, but they've now built in the systems and structures needed to custody and acquire and dispose of their Bitcoin for some practical purpose, whether it's to pay for rent, whether it's to do whatever. It's an incredibly powerful and stark difference. And seeing that makes it obvious to me that these people living in real Bitcoin land, you're going to see it's going to be obvious to the people who are in regulated Bitcoin land that these people are happier. Mm-hmm. They're more willing to say what they want to say. They have no fear, and there's just pure hope. I can never have that 100%, but I do want to provide systems that allow or that support and educate people around how to have that future, because it's a much more powerful, much more uplifting future for all of us.
It's beautiful vignette. That connection, between those individuals that have lived entirely outside the system with Bitcoin, having no fear, like that almost is the definition of freedom in a way. Like you can have everything in the world, but if you're scared about anything inside, then you're not free, right? You're subject to whatever that fear is, I guess. So this idea of the connection between regulation and fear inducement in the society running on the regulated money is very interesting to me. So, okay, we've come up on time today, but I do want to continue this conversation soon. Obi, as always, man, really great conversation. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
So do I. Thank you very much, matey.
Oh, real quick, could you let my audience know where they could find out more about you or your work?
Absolutely. So me on Twitter, I am at Obi, at OBI. I've been in Twitter for a long time, so I have a 3-letter Twitter. And Fedi is Fedi, Fedi.xyz. And Fedimint, which is the protocol that Fedi is based upon, is fedimint.org.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Obi.